In 1980s Indiana, a group of young friends witness supernatural forces and secret government exploits. As they search for answers, the children unravel a series of extraordinary mysteries. That is the synopsis of Stranger Things, one of the most successful series of our time. What most people don't know is that Stranger Things was based on a real-life story of similar events. And the crazy thing about this is that Stranger Things doesn't even depict 10% of the horrors that were witnessed in the real-life case. Even more shocking was that these atrocities were carried out under the authority of the United States military. This means your own government was involved in the torture and death of children. This is the horrific, true-life story of the Montauk Project. In 1988, or thereabout, an underground videotape made its debut in the strange and enigmatic world of UFOlogy and psychotronics. 3 men captivated a small gathering of eager listeners in a private house on the south coast of Long Island, spinning tales of secret government weather control technology, mood and thought modification by electronic means, actual mind control of subjects, willing and unwilling, transmission and reception of thought, electronic telepathy, and, as if that wasn't enough, actual teleportation of physical objects and people. One of those men was Preston Nichols, and he is mostly the person this video would be centered on. Now, here's the backstory of Preston, which is important because this is what made the Montauk Project famous. Early in the 1970s, Preston Nichols was an engineer with a focus on electromagnetism. He worked for a defense contractor on Long Island, and during this period, he was working with a group of psychics in researching telepathy and its application, and weirdly enough, he was getting good results. And before you roll your eyes at what I just said, I want you to pause this video and Google Project Stargate, and just read the summary of it, and then come back to finish this video. Now back to Preston. While conducting his research, he discovered that telepathy behaved exactly like a radio wave, and for some reason, at the same time, every day, his subjects' minds would be blocked, and they wouldn't be able to do anything. Even the simplest psychic tasks became hard. At first, he didn't notice this, but by the time he had figured it out, 3 years had passed. But still, he couldn't figure out why it was happening or what caused it. After 3 years of the unusual occurrence, Preston decided to investigate and brought in some radio equipment to monitor the signals during the times the psychic would black out. Thanks to this equipment, he learned that whenever 410 to 420 megahertz was detected, his subjects would jam and wouldn't be able to do anything. And after 20 minutes, the blocking signal would dissipate, and the psychics would be able to do their tasks. This caught Preston's attention, and he was curious enough that he started tracking the source of this signal, which led him to a big radar tower on Montauk Point on the east end of Long Island, New York, which was also a Montauk Air Force base, a military site. So there was nothing he could do, and for the time being, his quest for answers came to an end. Time passed, and Preston didn't give it much thought, until one day, a friendly call with a friend. His friend told him the Air Force base was now abandoned, seeing as a war was now looking impossible, and if he was still curious, he could go check it out. Curiosity got the better of Preston, and he did go to the site. As soon as he came towards the entrance, his mind came rushing with memories that he felt weren't his, but at the same time, he knew instinctively that it was, like a muscle memory kind of situation, where your body does something even before you think about it. And from the looks of his newfound repressed memories, it turns out that not only was he part of a covert operation that was so illegal it made the Mexican cartel and Boko Haram combined look like puppies, but he actually led the operation. and the name of this operation was the Montauk Project. The legends surrounding Montauk attracted national attention in 1992 with the release of the book The Montauk Project: Experiments in Time. This was the first of a series of books on the subject written by Preston Nichols and Peter Moon, which claimed to expose the secrets behind the Montauk experiments. They unveiled to the public a complex story of government cover-up and extraterrestrial technologies. And then, when you add the video of the location of the experiment, you get a nation that becomes worried. Now, to fully understand the Montauk Project, we have to take a detour to another notorious mystery called the Philadelphia Experiment. The experiment was said to have been carried out in 1943 and was allegedly an effort by the U.S. Navy to make the destroyer escort USS Eldridge invisible to enemy equipment, so as to bypass Nazi radar so that they could safely transport supplies to the Allies in Europe. Once the experiment started, the strangest thing in America's military history happened. The ship disappeared, and for 10 minutes, no one knew where it was. After 10 minutes was up, it reappeared, back, all intact. By all means, this was a success, and was a cause for celebration. Now they could fight the Germans and win. But when they boarded the ship, they saw something so horrific that they shut the project down immediately, despite its success. The experiment had devastating results for the crew on board, with some of them being rumored to have suffered from extreme physical and mental illnesses. Some of the crew members were never found, which was the case for most of the people on board, and some whose bodies were found were said to have been bonded or fused to the ship, like a piece of glue between a paper and a stick. It was total chaos and death everywhere on the ship, with screams of agony. The project was instantly shut down, and all evidence of it taking place was destroyed. The Navy has never admitted to any of these tests taking place, but people believe it happened, with research about its possibilities using Einstein's unified field theory dated as far back as 1955. Now, I won't go deeper into the Philadelphia experiment, because that is a whole long story on its own. But if you want to know more about the Philadelphia Project, the link to the video is in the description below. But the reason I brought up the Philadelphia experiment is because advocates of the Montauk Project believe that the research into invisibility, space-time manipulation, and whatever stuff they were working on did not end with the Philadelphia experiment, but rather prepared the foundation for more sophisticated trials that would take place at Montauk. Basically, the Montauk Project continued from where the Philadelphia experiment ended. At the heart of the Montauk Project are startling allegations that have captured the imagination of many. It is believed that between 1971 to 1983, children, orphans, and teenagers were kidnapped by a section of the U.S. military at Montauk Air Force Station, which is now known as Camp Hero, and that these kids were experimented on, with the majority of them dying from the brutal experiments and torture done on them. The project is said to have explored the depths of psychological warfare, developing techniques for brainwashing, remote influencing, and the programming of the human mind. These experiments allegedly included the use of electromagnetic waves to transmit thoughts directly into people's minds, inducing hallucinations or controlling their thoughts and actions without their knowledge. If these experiments and research become successful, that would change the landscape of warfare. Enemy combatants could be captured, brainwashed, given a new mission to either assassinate a target like the president of a country, or just be a double agent for them. And the best part about all this is that the enemy combatant wouldn't even know that he or she is a spy for the enemy. The person would be activated easily with a code word, And if psychics are used, that would mean there would be no need for the superior officers to physically say the code word. They could just project the word into the person's mind, and all of a sudden, the person is doing their will. And when the project is done, another word is said to deactivate the person, and the person, once again, wouldn't know that he or she just committed treason. So with this in mind, Project Montauk was created for the sole purpose of psychological warfare. And in charge of this program was Preston. Preston headed the psychotronics movement in the 1970s and 1980s, and according to his testimony, government officials were directly inserting ideas straight into people's brains using electromagnetic radiation. And why he couldn't remember that he was part of this operation was because he also used brainwashing techniques to repress his memories, basically practicing what he preached. And it worked, basically creating two personalities, one that was in charge of the Montauk Project, and the other just your regular average Joe. The abducted children were subjected to extreme levels of torture to break them and make their minds malleable. Waterboarding, sexual abuse, raping, beating, torture, starvation, sleep deprivation. They were abused in every way and every sense, all just to wake up whatever latent abilities they may have deep within them to be used by the government for warfare. And as you already guessed, not all kids were lucky, and most of them died. Because of these traumas, some kids did wake up their psychic abilities. Some of them were able to send ideas straight into people's minds, causing hallucinations or regulating people's ideas and behavior without their knowledge. Some people could locate anybody anywhere in the world with a piece of their clothing or spy on them, and some could even open portals. But I'm getting ahead of myself. All these were detailed in Preston's books. Now, what makes this case an intriguing one is that we don't know if Preston is telling the truth or not. Because guess what? Everything he said in his book that happened in the Montauk Project has actually happened and has been done by the United States government, except it was done on different projects. In 1932, 600 black men, of which 399 had syphilis, were observed and actively denied known treatment for the disease by the Public Health Service in what they called the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. These men were never treated for syphilis, and instead were monitored and experimented on like guinea pigs to see how bad the disease could get. One of the free treatments performed on them was painful spinal taps, which weren't even needed. The program went far past its initial 6 months, lasting 40 years, even when penicillin became the accepted treatment for syphilis by the late 1940s, which, by the way, was never offered to the farmers. A lot of people died an avoidable, treatable death. In 1953, the CIA began the MK-Ultra program that lasted 20 years, testing drugs developed for interrogation and mind control purposes. The government hired 80 institutes and 185 private researchers for roughly 2 decades to apply biological, chemical, and radioactive agents on unsuspecting citizens to create means of behavior control, just like the Montauk Project. Because of its reputation for distorting reality, the government used LSD in order to see if it could change a person's loyalties, for example, turning a Russian politician into an American spy. In order to test this, LSD was administered to prisoners, mental patients, prostitutes, and drug addicts. One mental patient under treatment received LSD for 174 straight days. Men who visited San Francisco brothels were also slipped LSD in rooms equipped with a two-way mirror, so doctors could record the effects. They picked brothels since the men would be too humiliated to discuss what happened. Even government officials were also given LSD to see whether it might induce a confession or erase a mind clean. MKUltra also studied drug-induced hypnosis as a means of creating anxiety or increasing intelligence, sleep deprivation, and ways to assassinate people using gas-propelled sprays and aerosols. A lot of people died, and also, just like with Project Montauk, the CIA denied something like this ever happening until the cat was let out of the bag, and they had no choice but to admit it. Also, Preston talked about psychic warfare as the foundation of the Montauk Project and the ability to spy on people in faraway places from the camp right there. Well, in 1977, the CIA, again with the collaboration of the U.S. Army unit DIA and SRI, established Project Stargate, which was to investigate the potential for psychic phenomena in military and domestic intelligence applications, and which, by the way, had a record success of about 69% before being supposedly shut down, which, again, the government denied ever existing. And I'm not even done with the list of crazy things the United States government has done. Starting in the early 1940s, the government exposed unsuspecting citizens to radioactive elements as part of the Manhattan Project. They injected 18 people with plutonium, gave more than 800 pregnant women vitamins that contained radioactive iron, and gave 73 Massachusetts disabled children radioactive oatmeal. You can also check out Operation Paperclip and Plum Island in your free time. And there are so many Black Op projects that it's almost impossible to believe. That's why most countries are afraid, because they know the United States government can do what they want, invade, overthrow, and all that evil, and then escape scot-free, painting a narrative of freedom in it, and nothing would ever happen. Instead, they get a round of applause, and then 20 years later declassify the actual truth to show that they were the bad guys all along. But that's not the main point of this video. The main point of bringing all this up is to show that not only was the Montauk Project possible, but it actually happened. And the only question that people kept asking was in the form of one word. Again. Now, the second part of this story is where I try and tie everything together. And stay with me, because it's going to be a bumpy, confusing ride. This might be the time you pause the video to go pee or do something, but just do what you have to do to avoid getting distracted, because if you miss one sentence, there is a 60% chance you will miss it all. That's how confusing the story I'm about to share is. Let's talk about the Philadelphia experiment again. So this lore became so popular to the point that a movie was actually made about it, which is also named the Philadelphia Experiment. When it debuted in theaters, one man got to watch the film, and that was 57-year-old Alfred Bielek. After seeing the Philadelphia Experiment in 1988, Bielek couldn't get rid of this eerie feeling that he'd seen it somewhere before. He was having an intense déjà vu moment. It was so strong that he had to undergo several kinds of what was known as New Age therapies. New Age therapies are a variety of holistic health practices that originated in the 1970s and are based on the idea that the mind, body, and spirit are interdependent, and also refer to a set of practices and beliefs that are based on the idea that individuals have the ability to heal themselves and improve their lives through spiritual and personal development. Anyway, thanks to this form of therapy, Bielek was able to uncover repressed memories of him working on the Montauk Project in the 1970s and 80s. He also found out that his memories had been locked away to keep the experiment secret, just like Preston, too. And the crazy thing is, they didn't even know each other at this point in time. As his memories came flooding back, he learned that his name wasn't even Bielek, it was Edward Cameron. And the reason he had a strong itch in his soul after watching the Philadelphia experiment was because he had also worked on the Philadelphia experiment with his brother, Duncan Cameron, when both men were in their mid-20s.
Final session. In 1989, Al Bielek came forward to reveal his participation in the astonishing Philadelphia experiment, and that he had survived time warping, invisibility, and electromagnetic zapping. Let's give a round of applause, if you will, to Al Bielek.
Thank you very much. Tonight should be considered part 2 of the lecture, which I delivered yesterday at noon regarding the Philadelphia experiment. Tonight we go into the Montauk Project and what happened there and why it's so significant, and particularly today, why it is significant.
Bielek told his story at a conference sponsored by the Mutual UFO Network a few years later. Having seen the film, he stated that the Philadelphia experiment was true, and he was the proof. According to Bielek, Nikola Tesla discovered how to turn the USS Eldridge invisible, and in the process created a time warp, dragging the ship into the future. The Cameron brothers were on board, jumping off the vessel and landing at Montauk's Camp Hero on August 12, 1983. The military caught them, investigated their claim, and when it was deemed true, they were sent back to the past with the mission of destroying the equipment on the Eldridge. According to Bielek, the brothers completed their mission. Some of the talented people who helped with the Philadelphia experiment were Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and John von Neumann. Now, playing with time travel will surely have an effect on anybody, and Bielek was about to find that out the hard way. The cause of the experiment was making him age rapidly, and his brother was almost dead, and the only way he could save his brother was to go back in time to meet his father and tell his father to get busy with mommy, so that his brother could be born, and then they would transfer his brother's consciousness from 1983 into the boy born in 1963, which, by the way, he did. Bielek referred to this version of Duncan as a walk-in soul. If at this moment you're lost, don't worry, I'm also lost, and I'm the one telling you the story. Moving on, his dad listened and got busy, and when the boy was born, the transfer was made. During the 1990 speech for the Mutual UFO Network, Bielek described in vague terms how he'd been de-aged, then had his memory of the entire event wiped, and was forced to live out the rest of his life as Al Bielek. His story was so captivating that it spread like wildfire, and this was when it attracted the attention of Preston Nichols, who would later befriend Bielek and share his own story. Preston talked about his experience working at Camp Hero on the Montauk Project. Then, this was when another memory unlocked, and Nichols now remembered that the reason he easily became friends with Bielek was because they had both worked together at Camp Hero, and chair that uses electromagnetics to amplify psychic abilities.
They got this chair from the aliens, or through some connection. Another associate of ours was on the station managing money, and he actually went out and bought this chair from somebody. He hasn't been able to dig out yet who. So what they essentially did is they took this chair, they made one computer to interface the chair itself to stay in the digital codes, and then another computer to interface it to a special computer to the transmitter, and then the transmitter. What they actually ended up with, in essence, was a mind amplifier.
Preston asserted that anything a person seated in the Montauk chair envisioned would initially be displayed on a transmitter screen, and then it would be brought into existence in the physical world in either a solid or transparent form. And this is where the third and final piece of the puzzle came in: Bielek's own brother, Duncan Cameron. Born in 1963, Duncan Cameron, the walk-in soul child version, was discovered to exhibit tremendous psychic abilities and was the focus of many of the Montauk chair experiments. Duncan apparently could manifest items only by thinking about them. The first experiment that was actually done was named the Seeing Eye. With a lock of a person's hair or another appropriate object in his hand, Duncan could focus on the person and be able to sense things as though he was seeing through their eyes, hearing through their ears, and feeling through their body. And with this ability, he could see through other people anywhere on the planet. Preston kept experimenting with Duncan, who was such a powerful psychic that no one suspected that he was a man from the distant past injected into a new body. Using the customized radio dishes at Camp Hero, he sought to harness the abilities of his adept subject in the Montauk chair to perform mind control tests. But perhaps the most disturbing and impressive feat was the Montauk time experiments. Witnesses and supposed participants have described complex devices capable of affecting time itself. Sadly, this is where the other children come in. By now, Duncan could not only do these amazing feats, but he had advanced enough to opening portals, and kids were brought in and sent through a portal into the unknown of space-time. If you're lucky, you land in a place that's friendly. If you're not lucky, you land during World War II, or worse, the Punic Wars. These kids were used as guinea pigs to test the portals and work out how safe it was. And when a level of safety was achieved, people could enter a preferred timeline to the extent that they could converse with their previous or future self. Yes, they even went to the future. The claims go beyond our current understanding of time and psychology, delving into interdimensional studies and extraterrestrial contact. Some stories describe the establishment of gateways to other planets or dimensions, which allow beings from other realities to enter ours. There are also reports of encounters with extraterrestrial creatures, collaboration on sophisticated technologies, and knowledge sharing between humans and aliens. If you're a fan of the hit TV series Stranger Things, by now you will start seeing the similarities. Stranger Things was actually based on the stories that came out from the Montauk Project. After several years of experimenting with Duncan in the Montauk chair, Preston claims that they could reliably travel to other times and places, even to Mars. Eventually, they were able to program Duncan with some basic commands so that the poor kid didn't need to be confined to the chair all the time. At one point, Preston's superiors told him to turn on the Montauk chair and leave it running 24/7. Preston didn't understand this order, but an order is an order, and he had to follow it. As the story goes, by having another time travel machine switched on, the Montauk Project successfully created a time wormhole to 1943 with power at both ends. That's how Ed and the Duncan Cameron of 1943 came through the portal, and the events described earlier by Alfred Bielek occurred. It was like the grandfather paradox. Preston quickly realized that time travel was way too complicated and far too dangerous to be messing around with, so he and 3 colleagues hatched a plan to use Duncan to shut down the project. After years of torturing children in ways you can't imagine and causing the death of many, they finally grew a conscience and decided to end the program. After weeks of planning, and when it was time, with everything in place, someone approached Duncan while he was on the chair and whispered, "The time is now." The contingency program was activated with that phrase. Duncan, who at this time was almost as strong as Professor Xavier from X-Men, created a monster of some sort from his mind. Remember, he had been training with materializing images from his mind, starting with small things to things like an apple, and now a monster. The monster was big and hairy, and here's the thing, maybe because of how large the beast was, where it appeared was outside the facility, but on the base, instead of right there in the facility. From where it appeared, it started wrecking everything in sight. It was also eating whatever it could see. Several people saw it, and they all described a distinct beast. There was now chaos on the base, and now it was heading towards the facilities where the person who summoned it was present. Preston, Ed, as well as whoever wanted to help them, used the commotion to start destroying things in the facility, and they set the children free. But the beast was closing in. Duncan was on the Montauk chair, which acted as a boost for Duncan's psychic power, which summoned the monster. Preston noticed this, and he knew if the monster should get to them, they wouldn't be spared, as it can't tell friend from foe. So, Preston smashed all the equipment that powered the Montauk chair. And with that, Duncan couldn't hold the image. As a result, the monster disappeared back into nothingness. That incident, plus the successful time anchor that was brought between August 12, 1943 and August 12, 1983, ensured that the project would be shuttered. Employees were then brainwashed, and in 1984, the lower levels of the base were filled in with cement. With this destruction, the program was finally shut down. When the videos and the book were released, it became an instant hit, and Preston found himself with some newfound celebrity status, with fans or supporters of his story. Some of his supporters, who still wear solid metal pots or tinfoil hats on their heads to block microwaves and prevent government control of their behavior, assert that Preston also had control over the weather, therefore demonstrating the government's similar powers. Preston is not alone in his assertion. Growing up on Long Island, Christopher Garetano has spent years convinced that Camp Hero is harboring something dangerous under government cover. He recorded his hunt on film for 2015's Montauk Chronicles and appeared in a Dark Files History Channel segment on the Montauk Project. Now, the Montauk Project all happened underground, so most people back then would see it as a military base. They wouldn't know that beneath their feet, one of the most heinous crimes had been committed. Garetano and others were fixated on finding these underground bases, which they believed to still be lying beneath Camp Hero, even if official government-issued blueprints suggested differently. And their search for truth returned back a positive result. They found out that there truly was an underground base below Camp Hero. In such, on one trip, Garetano brought a geophysicist along, and using imaging equipment, they proved that a large concrete building was buried 20 feet down. He was right, and he wasn't the only one. Another truth or thrill seeker, Brian Minnick, with his friends, explored inside the radar tower. Although they never uncovered any conclusive proof of a government cover-up, he did find documents and sealed doors, implying that Camp Hero's infrastructure is far more complicated, and the facility ran for far longer than official records will admit. Long after the military left Montauk, Brian discovered records of vast quantities of food ordered to the facility in the late 1980s. Brian's pictures of chambers with vividly painted walls and psychedelic patterned wallpaper act as proof that the Montauk Project did happen. Not only that, but remember the kids that were abducted? Some of them came out years later to also tell their stories. They are known as the Montauk Boys. They too, just like Preston and Bielek, had their memories repressed. And it wasn't until Preston and Bielek started speaking about the experiment that other Long Island men came out with their testimonies and memories of being abducted from their homes and taken to Camp Hero. The most famous of them is Stuart Swerdlow, who openly talks about his gruesome experience in the Montauk Project. Another survivor, identified under the alias James Bruce in Garitano's documentaries, talks about mind-bending drug tests in acid houses at Camp Hero. It's one thing for someone to write a book saying all these outlandish, strong claims with few supporting witnesses, but it's an entirely different thing for strangers to come out and say, "It's true, I was there." Even if you want to discredit Preston or Bielek, what of the men who came out to agree with him? Now, some of you might say, why wait that long to talk? Well, the human body experience is a crazy and weird one. Most people repress memories as a defense mechanism against difficult feelings that the memory would evoke. Some even go as far as having split personalities. You can pause this video and look up the case of Billy Milligan on Google. His case was so perplexing that movies have been made about it. But he's an example of how our minds really are flexible and will do anything to protect itself. I mean, would you rather think about how you were abused thoroughly without end every day? Or would you bury it deep down and never speak of it again? We all know the answer to that. So with all this proof, with videos and numerous witness statements, do you still think this is just a story? The crazy thing about this story, as I said earlier, is that it's very difficult to ascertain if it's true or not, because weirdly enough, everything they said they were part of, the United States government had done. So it was like separating oil from water. Which is which? Now, during my research, one thing I came across quite often was that even though the United States government is guilty of unholy things that can't be described, when it comes to the Montauk Project, they had no hand in it. They were innocent, which is an irony. So if the United States government had no take in the Montauk Project, then the table where all these stands starts to shake, and with each tremor, lies are revealed. Let's start with Preston. There are a number of things that cast doubt on the validity of the account of the Montauk Project. Aside from the sheer otherworldliness of most of the material, there are some things that were discussed by these three supposed heroes that should land them in federal prison. Let's start with a quote from Preston himself. Back in the early 1970s, the Montauk Group became interested in programming children. Gray aliens picked up about 50 kids and delivered them to Montauk. In some cases, the older youths, aged 17 to 22, were also groomed to be slave workers. The programmers concentrated on three particular ages, 9, 14, and 19. They would put kids in a room, stark naked. Radio-sensitive electronic paraphernalia was placed on their genitalia, and a diabolic program was started where they would be treated brutally. These kids would be beaten to within inches of their lives, until they were mentally broken, conscious hulks. Many died. And yeah, he also mentions aliens. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I will touch on this. But this outlandish claim, which alone discredits him, isn't even the bone of contention. Remember, I said kids were tortured and abused so they could be easily programmed. Well, the only way they could program them effectively was by sexually abusing them. But crazy enough, that's not even the bone of contention. The bone of contention is that Preston can deprogram any young man who was programmed. But how? Glad you asked. Here is a description from an article in Gear magazine, titled "It Came from Outer Space," November 2001, pages 76 to 82, by Chris Ketchum. Chris visited Montauk and spent months investigating the conspiracy, and he described exactly how Preston would deprogram these kids or young men, and this was his report. So what would happen in those rooms alone with Nichols? According to Keel, the subject undresses and lies down. Nichols massages the legs and arms and chest and head, scanning for frequencies. Then he takes the penis and strokes it, still scanning. Nichols masturbates the subject until the edge of orgasm, freezing the subject in a kind of pre-orgasmic dream state that was supposed to reverse and thereby nullify the sexual magic of the Montauk chair, to ground his subject against EM interference. Nichols grips the testicles. Sometimes he attaches electrodes to the ears. In response, Nichols said, not all of them would come to orgasm.
Nichols had built a replica of the Montauk chair and research room. And eyewitnesses said Nichols would go into the room with a man, usually in his early 20s. There'd be some noise. About 20 or 30 minutes later, the young man would come out disheveled, often with an uneasy look on his face, and Nichols would be covered in sweat. At one point, Nichols was deprogramming as many as 25 Montauk boys, a few times a week, who he unfortunately called disciples.
Yeah, the way he deprograms these kids who think they were part of such programs was to abuse these kids, and in some cases, raping the kid. I honestly don't know how he got away with this, because Preston himself never denied these accusations and said that's how you deprogram them. And his book is so messed up with conspiracies that it makes 2023/2024 Hollywood look good. He mentions trips to Mars, time travel as far back as biblical times, with a mission to take a sample of blood from Jesus Christ himself and to kill Jesus. Connections with two different alien races, connections with neo-Nazis, Aryans, and how the project was financed with Nazi gold, and so much more. If it was fiction, this would make a good weird story, as it's like a mini-universe with all things inside it, which, funny enough, is stated at the beginning of his book. The famous survivor of the Montauk Boys, which is Stuart Swerdlow, is a self-professed hyperspace intuitive, who's part alien abduction survivor, part New Age healer, and he'll deprogram you from the government's mind control for a cool $300. According to Swerdlow, alien beings snatched him while his parents were brainwashed. He was then experimented on at Camp Hero and sent back in time on secret missions. Fast forward several years later, and Stuart Swerdlow admitted guilt to bank fraud after embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from a Long Island food distributor, which, by the way, he said he did because he was brainwashed. He has also come forward to confess that he has subsequently been involved with the deprogramming of other men using masturbation. Even Garetano, who discovered the underground basement, had this to say: I would be very careful of anything that anybody tries to get you to do sexually with them. You know what the reason is. I've heard the reasoning coming out of their mouths. It's all for deprogramming purposes. It's just like a medical procedure. Listen, if it's sexual in nature, these guys are predators, 100%. You know they should not be applying these techniques to people in covert situations. They do not have any credentials. The first day I met Preston Nichols, and I think Preston is a nice guy, but he was still trying to get everybody into the chair naked. The guys that were with me the first time I met him in 2006 and I have footage of this. How does this go from, I just met you 10 minutes ago, to now, now I'm just going to put my hands on your genitals. And trust me, that's not all that discredits Preston. But let's pause here for a moment and examine his accomplice, Bielek and Duncan. Bielek passed away in October 2011, but his name will remain associated with the Philadelphia experiment. Like Carl Allen and Morris K. Jessup, he too has grown to be a part of the myth himself. His testimony as a true eyewitness and participant in the Philadelphia experiment at the MUFON conference in 1990 was what catapulted him to fame. But here's the thing. His stories are full of holes, not consistent, and he has forgotten and changed his stories on numerous counts. Now, at first, I personally understand how even a functionally healthy mind and body can be forgetful. There is so much information that our brain processes that it's easy to forget things. I sometimes forget how old I am, and I have to take a moment to do a little calculation to answer. So I was giving Bielek that benefit of the doubt. But there are important things that are core and parcel of your personality that are difficult, dare I say impossible, to forget. Like, you don't forget your mother's maiden name, which Bielek forgot in one of his testimonies. You don't forget the school you went to. You can forget the year you got admission, but you can't, forget the place where you spend at least a quarter of a decade at, which he somehow did. Even the images he used to represent his brother turned out to be fake. And there is so much more that just makes it hard to believe him, even if I wanted to. In such, Bielek never thought of the Philadelphia experiment until he watched the movie, and according to Bielek, the Philadelphia experiment is essentially the same as the original movie that came out in 1984. In Bielek's rendition, he and his brother were the two sailors, as seen in the movie, on board the test ship USS Eldridge, and just like in the movie, they also time traveled. Which, if true, is one heck of a coincidence for a movie producer and writer to come up with, don't you think? The movie wasn't a drama movie where we can say people can relate to it. This was a totally different, weird movie that was based on a story that was based on a story that was based on a story heard from one side of whatever source of information they had back then. And with 80% accuracy, they were able to act out what happened in Bielek's life? That's one heck of a coincidence, don't you think? Other testimonies from him are drawn from the well-known Roswell incident, and one more from another film, Alternative 3, which chronicles hidden colonies on Mars. The claim that he said he served in the military, which was why he was part of the Philadelphia experiment in the first place, can't be proven. There are no records of him or his brother in the crew list for the ship or in the military. In such, I'll do you one better. There's only one Cameron who was enlisted during that period, and his name was Wilbur O. Cameron, and he was nowhere near that ship. As for the third person, his brother, well, at this junction, if the first two main characters are severe liars and pedophiles, then there's a high chance that the last person in this puzzle is also one. Now, don't get me wrong, Camp Hero did exist. Built at the height of the Cold War in 1958, Camp Hero's enormous radar was part of America's semi-automatic ground environment defense network, designed to detect a surprise attack by Soviet missile bombers. Like Israel's Iron Dome, the massive antenna would send a 30-minute warning in the event of a nuclear attack. Meanwhile, the massive antenna at Camp Hero had raised suspicion as far back as when it was first constructed, with a frequency that goes up to 425 megahertz, which is also the frequency supposedly required to enter human consciousness, like Preston said. And truly, many residents living nearby did report suffering from severe headaches over the years, but it wasn't because of any underground secret operation. Certain frequencies can affect our health, and back then, seeing as it was during a warring period, I'm sure a few headaches here and there is a small price to pay for a warning system that can save lives. As for the deep underground base, that is real, but most people think it would probably be used for the development of nuclear weapons that would most likely be top secret, just like how the Manhattan Project was also top secret. Look, I understand why people believed this story. If not for the shady nature of the men telling it, this story would have been deemed true. What terrible thing has the US government not done? Terrorism on domestic and foreign soil? Check. Torture, killing, stealing? Check. Running experiments that you only see in science fiction movies? Check. Contact with aliens? Check. The list goes on, so it's understandable that many people would believe, and once Preston saw that people believed him, he ran with it, publishing books upon books that earned him money, being paid to speak at conferences, charging people to deprogram them. And I'm pretty sure when he met Ed and Duncan, they decided to merge together, which gave the stories more credence of some sort, and they made more money. And even if you doubt me, at least Stuart Swerdlow is proof enough that it was a scam, because he claimed to be part of the Montauk Boys, which Preston corroborated, and also claimed to be deprogrammed, and was taught to deprogram other people by Preston. Plus other nonsensical rubbish and claims that he made. And once again, this was someone Preston endorsed. So if Preston did endorse him, that means everything he said was a lie. Ironically, in this story, the US government is innocent. But there's one story where they aren't, and in this story, you get to see how they control the affairs of all men all over the world by binding together in one sacrificial pagan cult, and you will finally see how much power they have. In such, as a fun fact, this cult was exactly where they planned everything that resulted in the creation of the Manhattan Project, or as you famously know it, the atomic bomb.